So now that users can log into and out of our application, it's time to set them up in the database as soon as they log in, so that our database will store all the information about them at any time. Now this part is also going to be pretty new to anyone who's never used a database before. So just as a heads up, you're going to be like, not sure what's going on here. Just copy the code with me and we'll talk about it as we go, okay? So here's the first thing you should know. Inside your Firebase console, the only tab we've looked at so far is the authentication tab, right? If you look down below that, there's a database tab also. Does everybody see that database tab? Click that database tab. It's time to get our database going. Firebase will give you this cool little like Firebase intro to database animation. Ooh, the cloud Firestore. The next generation of the real-time database with more powerful queries and automatic scaling. Don't worry about that, it's not important. All you need to know is that it allows us to create a database, what's known as a NoSQL database, that stores documents about any piece of information we want. So you're going to click that Create Database button. Click it. And it'll give you two options. Start in locked mode or start in test mode. We're going to start in test mode. Cool? Which will allow us to do all kinds of crazy things to our database that will later need to change so that only logged in users can do stuff. But let's start with this. Cool? So if you click start in test mode, and everyone has to click start in test mode or everything will not work, as a heads up. So make sure you do that right now. When you click create database, make sure you start in test mode. I cannot emphasize this enough, because if you do not do that, nothing will work and you will not understand why, and it will make you sad. And I do not like sad students. And then click enable. It'll set up all this stuff for you. It'll get this going. And as soon as it does, ta-da! Okay, take longer. The suspense is killing me. I know, I'm feeling it. Ah, great. And then it'll set up your database like this. Now your database has two different things in it. Collections and documents. Those are the two things your database has. A collection is just a collection. It's a collection of things. It's a bunch of things. You can think of a collection as a folder, as some digital assistant carrying a folder with the name of whatever your collection is on that folder. And inside that folder, you have a bunch of documents, and the documents contain all the information about whatever you want. So what we're going to do is, as soon as a user logs in, we're going to create a collection of users. You do not need to do this, I just want to show you, of users. And as soon as we create a collection of users, we're going to create documents for each user. Each user will have a document, and they're going to have a name, an avatar source or photo URL, an ID, email, stuff like that. And so to do this, we actually have to go back into our code and make sure that we set up every time a user logs in right here, every time they sign in with Google, we actually want to grab all their information, and we also want to save it into our database. Here's how we do that. So right here, I don't know if you remember this, but as soon as the user logs in here, if we inspect element, as soon as they log in, I'm going to sign out, then I'm going to sign in again, it's going to sign me in, and as soon as I sign in, I get this big user object back here with all the information about me as a user. So I'm going to grab the display name, the email, the photo URL, and the user ID and store that in my database. Cool? Here's how you do it. So right here, we're going to first head into our code, and we are grabbing just the avatar source right here. I'm deleting that console.log because we don't need it anymore. We know this works. And then below the avatar source, I'm going to say const name equals user.displayname. And the reason I said that is because right here in this object, if we go to user.displayname, it'll give me what? Jeff Astor, right? If I say user.email, it'll give me what? jastor18@gmail.com. If I say user.photourl, we already know it gives us the link to my image. And if I say user.uid, it gives me this user ID here that I can use later. So in the code, we say const name equals user.displayname, const email equals user.email, and const user ID equals user.uid. And then I'm going to create an object that we're going to store inside the database. So I'll say const user info equals an object with all the information in it, where the name is my name, where the ID is the user ID, where the URL is avatar source, and the email is the email. We could actually probably call that photo URL or something to stay consistent. Doesn't matter what you call it. Whatever you want, as long as it's the same thing every time. And as soon as we got that, we just send it to a function. And that function will say add user to database with the user info, and let's just give it the user ID also. Even though the user ID is already stored in there, I'm just going to use the user ID as my second piece of information in that function. So that whenever the user logs in, we're going to save them to our database so that every other user can see them. Does that make sense? Now, it might not make sense right away. It's okay if it doesn't. But that's essentially what we want to do. We're going to create a function right now called add user to database. And that is going to take the user's information and it's going to add them to the database. Now, this might seem like it's going to be complicated, but it's actually really easy in Firebase. We're going to write about 4 lines of code to do this. Sound good? Sensational. Magnanimous. Glorious. Magnificent. I'll leave this up here so you can copy it down really quickly. So let's write that function. We say function add user to database. That takes in the user info and the user ID. And with Firebase, we actually first need to grab a database. We need to grab a connection to the database. We're already connected to Firebase ourselves, but we need to store an object, a single object that holds all the information about our database. So I'm actually going to do that at the very top of this file. As soon as this file is created, I want to grab an instance of the database. So I do, just like I did authentication right here, to grab all the information about the authentication service, I say const database equals Firebase dot Firestore. And Firestore is the name of the database we are using. It stores all the information about our users, or whatever we want, and our messages, and maybe the friends, contacts, all their texts. Anything of that nature is going to be stored on the database, and we grab an instance of the database like this. We just run this Firestore function. It's like, okay, cool. All the stuff about your database is now stored in this object. If you don't know what that means, again, let me just show you. I think it's easier just to show you how do we use it. So as soon as we run this function, add user to database, we say const user collection reference, or ref, is equal to database.collection users. And this is grabbing a reference to our database. It's saying, hey, database, will you find a folder labeled users? And we call these folders collections. And so the database looks for a folder or collection with a label of users. And it grabs a reference to that and it gives it back to you. So it's like, yeah, cool, I know where that is. What do you want to do with it? And you're like, I would like to make a new document inside that folder, a new user. So I would say const new user reference, or ref, is equal to user collection ref, the thing we just grabbed right here, dot doc. And the document, the dot doc, creates a new document in that folder. Now that document also needs a label. the label we're going to use is the user ID. By doing that, it stores a document in our database under the users folder that is labeled according to the user's ID. So every user has its own unique ID. We know this is unique according to Google. And so all we need to do is create a document with that user ID, and then we set the new user ref, we set the information equal to all the user's info. And that will actually store every user in our database, just like that. And this you will do every time you need to say something to the database. You do 3 steps. You get a reference to the collection you need. You create a document in that collection. And then you set the info equal to what you want. Now, if you do those 3 things, every time you log in, it will update your database with that user's info. So if that user's info changes, it'll update it right here when it sets that reference equal to the user info. Now, I'll let you copy this down for a second, but I want you to sign in and out as soon as you're done and see what changes in the database tab of your Firebase console. Give it a shot. Now, to check if this works, sign out and sign back in again. And if you do this correctly, and you check your Firebase and refresh right here, you should see a new collection added with 1 document in that collection. That document should have an ID equal to your user ID. Oops, didn't work. Did I not save it? I did not save it. Save. Let's try you again. One more time. Sign out. Sign in. Okay. Let's try this one more time. Let's refresh. Make sure I did it right. Okay. Now I have a user collection. This users collection stores all my users. And then right here, the user, each one has a key. That is the user ID that I put right there. That new document is created with that user ID key. And that goes right here, and it uniquely identifies that user. And then all the information about that user is stored right here. And so anytime I want to find information about that user, I can. And it's all right here. What's cool about this is now, if you get a bunch of users to log in to your application, you can then take all those users' info and use it in your app. And this makes your life a lot easier. For instance, if I want to sign in with a couple other Gmails, I should have more users than signed into my Gmail. So if I do this here, and I sign in under a different account, I click sign in. Let me select one of my other Gmail accounts. I'm going to go with my school Gmail account. I sign in, and then I check, here we go. I check Firebase, and I should now have 2 users in there, and I do. I have another one. And so if I sign out again, and I sign into another user account, I should have 3 users saved in my database. And so by doing this, every time a new user logs into my app, I now have 3 users in my database. You see that? This makes your life so much better, because I now have a user here, and a user here. And so the last thing we need to do is whenever we load this up, display those users on the screen. And if we can do that, that's pretty much the Messenger app minus the messages. So I know this is a lot. This is a pretty long video also, but we've gotten through almost everything you need to know. So nicely done.